The Cold War, despite the name, was more of a competition fought between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War technically began on March 12, 1947. Its reason for starting goes back to World War II, which had ended 2 years before. The United States and the Soviet Union were both part of the Allied powers, hence making them victorious in World War II. After the war, however, their alliance broke, in part because of their economical ideologies. The Soviet Union practiced communism, and the United States practiced the opposite, capitalism. Both being superpowers, they ended up flexing their authority on each other, thereby igniting the beginning of the Cold War. At the Potsdam Conference, hosted after Germany's surrender, the United States, United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union decided that Germany would be split into thirds. The Western two would be West Germany, and the Eastern third would be East Germany. West Germany would be divided between France, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, East Germany would be completely under Soviet rule. The capital of Germany, Berlin, which sat clearly inside of East Germany, would be divided in a similar fashion. However, this still caused some issues. The residents of East Berlin, which was a lot less economically successful, went to West Berlin en masse. Out of jealousy and stubbornness, the Soviet Union blocked all of the ways the Allies could get basic needs into Berlin. Well, almost every way. In regards to airplanes, they couldn't do much. Considering the possibility of nuclear war, the Soviet Union decided to do something. On May 12, 1949, the Soviet Union officially stopped the Berlin blockade. Korea, which had been occupied by Japan since 1910, was given independence on August 15, 1945, when Japan announced cessation of hostilities. The United States and the Soviet Union wanted it to be ruled with their respective economical ideology. An agreement in 1945 stated that in the Korean peninsula, everything above the 38th parallel would be ruled by Communist North Korea, while everything below the 38th parallel would be ruled by capitalist South Korea. However, this didn't work that well. On June 25, 1950, North Korea launched an invasion of South Korea. On September 12, the United Nations made landings at Pusan, South Korea. 3 days later, landings were made in Incheon, South Korea. By November 25, South Korea had pushed North Korea far north. By now, the Communist Chinese had joined, supporting North Korea. A lot more back and forth occurred, eventually ending with the armistice on July 27, 1953, when the border, which is near the original border was settled, was created. Known as the Demilitarized Zone, it still sits today. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first satellite ever, Sputnik, into space. Many people consider this the beginning of the space race. 4 years later, in a capsule, the Soviet Union launched the first ever man into space, a cosmonaut named Yuri Gagarin. On August 13, 1961, the East Germany began construction on the Berlin Wall. Before it was built, East Berliners could freely travel into the much more free and economically prosperous West Berlin, but not anymore. Some families were divided forever. On October 16, 1962, the CIA told President Kennedy that a U-2 spy plane had spotted mid-range missiles on the communist island nation of Cuba. About 450 miles away from Florida, the missiles could easily reach a majority of the United States. In response, the United States and the Soviet Union had a 13-day standoff. This was the closest the United States ever got to nuclear war. The missile crisis ended when the Soviet Union agreed to take its missiles out of Cuba if the United States took theirs out of Turkey. On July 20, 1969, as a part of the Apollo 11 NASA mission, 3 American astronauts flew to the moon, with 2 of them, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, walking on it. The main capsule was flown by Michael Collins. This is highly considered the end of the space race, with the United States being victorious. On April 30, 1975, the Vietnam War finally ended after 20 years of extreme fighting. Similar to the Korean War, it was fought between Communist, Soviet-backed North Vietnam and capitalist, American-backed South Vietnam. After the execution of South Vietnamese dictator Ngo Dinh Diem and the death of North Vietnamese dictator Ho Chi Minh, along with horrendous violence and American protests, in 1973, the United States finally pulled all troops out of South Vietnam. The North Vietnamese forces, or Viet Cong, then took South Vietnam by storm. The war ended when South Vietnam surrendered to the Viet Cong. South Vietnam's capital, Saigon, was renamed Ho Chi Minh City, and the entire country became communist. In 1985, after multiple short-lived leaders, Mikhail Gorbachev became the Soviet Union's leader. He wanted the Soviet people to be happy. He played a big part in the Cold War's end. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down. 1 year later, on October 3, 1990, Germany was reunified under the West Germans' capitalist government. On March 11, 1990, Lithuania became the first country to leave the Soviet Union. More Baltic countries followed suit. Eventually, Lithuania and some other former Soviet nations would join NATO, the anti-communist alliance. 9 U.S. presidents: Harry S. Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, served during the Cold War. 6 Soviet presidents: Joseph Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, Leonid Brezhnev, Yuri Andropov, Konstantin Chernenko, and Mikhail Gorbachev, also served during the Cold War. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union fully collapsed into 15 nations. Finally, after over half a century, the Cold War was finally over. Thanks for watching my brief video about the Cold War. Comment below if you want more historic videos.